after just hours of learning the tragic news of James Foley, somebody that our own Luke Vargas knew personally, the New Hampshire journalist who was beheaded for being a reporter. We explore now the real world. That's the real world, folks. The real world of an elaborate sting operation that was launched by an elite Homeland Security team that was created to stop not only Iran, but China and North Korea and Russia. And all of this from stealing U.S. military technology that I've been telling you about this morning. But to tell us the real deal is here, folks. A finalist for the Pulitzer. What a terrific and a personal honor it is to welcome investigative reporter for Reuters, John Shiffman, and his new book, Operation Shakespeare. The true story of an elite international sting. This is a Simon & Schuster publication. John, it is really an honor to welcome you.
It's great to be here, Phil. I really appreciate it, and appreciate what you have to say about James Foley. I didn't know him, but I certainly have friends who did, and it's just horrible.
Unbelievable. Where have we come as a human race? We haven't advanced, but that's a philosophical discussion for another time. You, John, have looked at the real elements of humanity in your book, Operation Shakespeare. Tell us, what is the book about first?
Sure. Well, when you don't think of Homeland Security agents going overseas undercover. Typically, when we think of Homeland Security, what we think about is the TSA. We think about protecting the border.
Right.
And we also, we don't think about how our enemies might be stealing U.S. military technology and then turning it against U.S. troops. But that's exactly what's happening, and what Operation Shakespeare is all about. Operation Shakespeare uses the background and the tension of one Homeland Security case, an extraordinary one, to describe a shadow war that takes place daily, but pretty much removed from the headlines.
Yes.
It's a sting against a prolific Iranian arms broker who's buying radar, sonar, drone material, and fighter jet material, and sneaking it out of helping the Iranian government to sneak it out of the United States for Iran's use, and also use in Afghanistan and Iraq.
John, would you agree or disagree that a lot of the lethal weapons are really the ones, not the huge ones, not the big rockets, but rather the smaller ones?
Yeah, what we're talking about, when we think about arms dealers, we think about Victor Boot, we think about guys,
exactly,
sending RPGs and 10,000 machine guns and that sort of thing, and
right.
And here we're talking about components, and some of these components. Is the most important technology. Sometimes it's smaller than a fingernail. I mean, it's really small items, and you can take things that you and I wouldn't recognize or even think are lethal in any way, but they are. I mean, you string enough of these together, you have radar that can shoot down radar that can help missiles shoot down airplanes, and it's frightening because in many ways because. You can't look. You can look at drugs, you can look at guns, and you can say, okay, those things shouldn't be smuggled. But you look at some of this other stuff, and it's really hard to tell how lethal it can be.
Yes, absolutely. And with this technology now, did you have to go undercover to follow the agents and all these transfers of military technology? What was your role like?
I know I did not go undercover. I traveled to, but the agents. I did travel with some of the agents to Dubai, which is the hub of where a lot of this happens in the United Arab Emirates. A lot of the stuff is ordered supposedly for places in Dubai and other places, and then it gets rerouted to Iran. And the agents struggle there. I'm trying to think of something similar in your area, but the port of Dubai, I drove it with the agents. I mean, it's miles and miles and miles long. I also traveled to Tbilisi, Georgia, where the sting takes place. And you can see there how, and talk to the agents there, and also talk to the Republic of Georgia federal agents, and to get a sense of what it's like. Now, this book takes place in many different places. One of the other places besides Dubai and Tbilisi, Georgia, It takes place also in London a little bit. I visited a notorious British arms dealer in London who helped train the Americans to try to help them catch the Iranians and the Chinese and the Russians and the Libyans at the time. I'm trying to acquire all this stuff.
What was it like meeting these these people?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that a lot of it's fascinating. I mean, the guy in London, he's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
He's pretty blunt. He's sort of at the end of his career, and he said people like me are despicable and probably shouldn't exist. They, helping spread arms all over the world.
Interesting.
The agents are really interesting because they are this small group of Homeland Security agents who work to protect the U.S. troops, and a lot of them were in the Navy, and they understand how important this technology is. And that's one of the reasons that they do it. We're not just talking about paperwork here. We're, and violations of for sanctions reasons or for political reasons. We're talking about real world consequences. And in the book, one of the other groups of people that I got to meet was family and friends and former Army buddies of a lieutenant who's killed in the first few pages of the book, and he is killed by a remote control IED in Iraq in action. And the triggers for those remote control IEDs have been traced back to Iran, which had been buying them from American manufacturers, which is just extraordinary that American stuff can be used against our troops, in Iraq and in Afghanistan.
Unbelievable.
It's very well documented.
Unbelievable. When I think about this, let's take a closer look at this happening. There are American companies that they're doing this obviously for the money. They don't think of. Well, tell us the process. I mean, this technology is really what gives America our advantage. And
right. It's the reason that that the Army fights at night mostly because we hold a distinctive advantage with night vision.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The night vision we're talking about here is not what hunters use here in the United States or what television cameras use. It's really, really remarkable. It also has thermal capabilities. It can see through. Actually, you got a pretty good example there when you had the bombing after the marathon in Boston, where you could see from the police helicopter the capture of one of the bombers. It's even better than that, than what the U.S. military has. And you don't want your enemy to have that. And we rule the seas because we have the best the best aircraft carriers and best subs that can sneak around.
Right.
And the same with the Air Force. And we want to keep that advantage because that means our troops are better protected.
Yeah, but now it's ending up in the hands of our enemies and from American companies.
Right, and in some in many cases, the American companies simply don't know, but in other cases, they have known.
Yeah.
And some of the companies that have been busted for this or that have been fined for this are household names. I mean, Hughes Company shared critical rocket guidance and satellite technology with the Chinese and helped Beijing improve their ICBMs. A Northrop subsidiary sold the internal navigation source code for Air Force One to a Russian company, revealing classified capabilities. ITT Corporation is probably the worst. They sent technology overseas, particularly to China, that involved our night vision and countermeasures for the night vision. So it's really shocking sometimes how American companies have put profits over national security and the security of our troops.
Any surprises when in your research, and how long was your research with all of this, John?
It took about 2 years to put the book together, and one of the things that I tried to do here was to tell it in an engaging style. To write about it as a story, not as a public policy.
Yes, it reads like a novel.
That's the aim, because I think more it makes it more accessible to more people, because I wish more people knew about the threat that the troops face and what and how important this really is. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest surprise in writing about this, I think for the general public, one of the biggest surprises is going to be that so much gets over there, and that there's infighting within the U.S. agencies and the bureaucracy. I was more surprised by the fact that so much stuff is being acquired by our potential enemies, including Russia.
Right.
The infighting, the bureaucratic stuff, it didn't surprise me too long, because I've been writing about federal law enforcement for a while. It's discouraging about the competition between them, but I think that it's not all that surprising. But really, the surprising thing is almost at the beginning. I had no idea that we had several hundred Homeland Security agents who do nothing but try to stop this military technology from getting outside of the United States.
Incredible.
Just had no idea that how big the problem was.
I didn't either until your Operation Shakespeare, and it brought to light that there is a lot of black market trading in military technology, more than we would have ever thought of if it hadn't been for your research and your book here. How many CIA stings do you think have taken place, since 9/11, let's say?
Well, they say that I read in the book that the CIA tried, I believe, about 10 of these similar stings since then, and only one was successful. And
wow!
And in terms of Homeland Security, this was their first big international, overseas successful sting, where they were able to lure someone from Iran. I mean, it's a lot easier to arrest somebody inside the United States.
Yeah, of course.
Or if when they just land, say, at JFK or at Logan.
Tell us about the character here, Amir Ardebeli.
Well, Amir Ardebeli, he's the Iranian arms broker, and he had worked for the Iranian government, and his entire job was to try to acquire American technology that mostly military, that was banned from export to Iran. And the reason that the Iranians need so much American technology is because their infrastructure, engineering, electrical, all of it, military, has an American backbone because we supplied the Shah in the 60s and the 70s, and some of those planes are still flying, and some of those, most of the infrastructure is American.
Right.
And his job was to try to acquire this through middlemen, and then he realized he could make more money as a middleman having the Iranian government send him requests. And he considered himself a capitalist. I mean, he was a businessman, and his wife told me that she really got a kick out of the fact that he made money by basically smuggling American technology to use against Americans. She got a real kick out of that because she had big beefs with the American government and the way it conducted its foreign policy.
Wow. And tell us the charges that were brought against Ardebeli.
He was charged with essentially he was charged with money laundering, which it's not only is it illegal to buy from Iran, it's also illegal to wire money. And so what he would do, which was fairly typical, was he used banks in Switzerland and in Dubai to find ways around the American financial embargo. I should say here also that some of the big banks have also been busted for being complicit with the Iranians trying to get around American sanctions. He was also charged with specifically 3 items involved in the case. One is radar chips. He tried to buy 1,000 radar chips that can be used to pinpoint multiple targets in the sky. And we can see how important that is from what happened in the Ukraine with the downing of the Malaysian airliner. That technology gets in the wrong hands.
Yep.
He was charged with trying to import gyroscopes, sophisticated gyroscopes that can be used to steer missiles. And you can see in, for example, in Gaza, you can see now that the missiles that the Hamas and rockets Hamas is firing aren't very accurate. And you can see that how important, obviously, technology is on the other end because the Israelis have their Iron Dome and the way to protect themselves. So you can see how that can make a difference, real-world difference. And then the third thing he was trying to buy was computer upgrades for the F-4 and F-14 aircraft that the Iranians have. And, the aircraft don't fly if they don't have the right computer software. And they needed the upgrades for those.
Who else in Operation Shakespeare was charged and sentenced and sent away to jail?
What happened was after the sting in Tbilisi, Georgia, the Americans were able to get a hold of Ardebeli's laptop because he brought it with him to the sting.
Okay.
And the Americans were able to find other names of other people. But to answer your question, Not very many people. Unfortunately, the will just didn't seem to be there.
Oh, wow.
But these cases are very hard to make because you have to show intent. You have to show that people know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is you have to lure them to a place where they can be arrested.
Yes.
And that's really hard.
Yeah, of course it is, especially proving intent. You're so right. And yet all these crimes are going on. Do you think that Congress ought to make more laws that have fangs and teeth and are... What do you think of the laws? Let me ask it that way. What do you think of the laws that are right now on the books regarding this kind of activity?
Well, the laws that are on, so some laws are there that are working. There's the Justice Department and others have tried to get Congress to increase the penalty. Sometimes the penalties aren't very high for doing this. They're in the 3 and 4 and 5 year range.
Gee, wow.
And that doesn't necessarily square with what's at stake here.
No, it doesn't.
The other thing is the rubric that we have, the legal system that we have, the administrative system for export control, was set up to counter the Soviets during the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that it's completely outdated and it probably protects too much.
Yeah.
I think everybody recognizes that, and that it's incredibly a very convoluted system that involves multiple agencies, and it's due for reform. And President Obama proposed a reform in 2010. It's a 3-part reform. They're sort of in phase 2, but the truth of the matter is they probably won't get to phase 3. They may, but for that they're going to need Congress. And to get Congress to agree on anything these days is, as you know, pretty damn difficult.
Terrible.
And until they get to that final stage, I'm not sure it's really going to make a difference in some of the reforms that they're trying to make. I mean, there's a fractured and contentious law enforcement, Homeland Security, Commerce, and the FBI and others sometimes argue over cases, who gets to do them, how they're going to be done. It's frankly a little silly and childish, but there it is. And so I mean, everybody agrees it's a big problem, but Congress, they've held one hearing in 4 years on this issue, and they didn't invite anyone from law enforcement. They treated it sort of like an administrative and paperwork and economic and political issue, and not a military and law enforcement issue. And I think it would be great if they could pursue some of the reforms that they've talked about and others. But meantime, the soldiers are in danger.
I think we ought to purchase and send about 500 copies of Operation Shakespeare to every damn one of them.
I think that's a great idea.
John Shiffman is our special guest, who is not only a noted Reuters investigative reporter, but, ladies and gentlemen, has brought forth the news and the operation of Operation Shakespeare that is just eye-opening. The true story of an elite international sting that reads very much like a novel, and I'm sure that was the design of the why you wanted to write it this way, so it didn't come across as a technology written book.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to read homework. When you go to buy a book, I think you don't want to. You want to have. I don't want to call it fun because it's a serious topic, but you want to make it entertaining,
engaging.
And
yes.
I think there are plenty of books that are written that are written as if it's academics and it's homework, and
right.
This is designed for people to read on the beach, but also understand what's this is a very important issue.
Sure.
And people ought to know about it, and and hopefully it's something that would appeal to a broader audience.
John, it's all about money. Well, not only money and power and whatever, corruption and all, but the money part of this is always interesting. Where does this money originate? How does it end up in, let's say, Switzerland or wherever it is? That in itself is probably interesting enough to write a couple of chapters on where this money is and why it's used in the way it is used.
Sure. Well, the money comes from the Iranian government is they're the one, or the Chinese government or the Russian governments. The governments are the ones that are making the orders, because nobody needs 1,000 radar chips, other than a state actor. I mean, nobody other than a country would need that. The money part of it is fascinating, and the one bank, I'll just give you an example, Credit Suisse, obviously based in Switzerland, started with a scheme back in during President Reagan's term. When President Reagan issued sanctions against Gaddafi in Libya, Credit Suisse came up with this plan, and what they do is they strip out any, if you make a wire from Libya, they change the name so that the American regulators can't catch it. And they did this for Iran. The idea started with Libya, but they used it mostly for Iran, and it was remarkable. They would set up, and they printed marketing brochures and everything that show that say, if you have a Persian-sounding name or Iranian-sounding name, we'll change your name for you. We have computer software that's just as good as the U.S. government. We can change what your name sounds like so that the transaction will go through.
Wow.
So it's fairly sophisticated, and Credit Suisse was fined over $500 million for about a 10 years of doing this sort of thing. In big business, it is about money, and it is about people sometimes, and companies sometimes saying, putting profit motive against troops' lives, saying, it doesn't really matter.
Huh.
But it does matter.
It certainly does.
It's extraordinary.
And if, ladies and gentlemen, I recommend you picking up a copy of Operation Shakespeare, the true story of an elite international sting. This is a Simon & Schuster publication by John Shiffman. And I do want to, you opened the book in a very poignant and interesting way by mentioning the cherub-faced second lieutenant from New Jersey and his platoon. Tell us a little bit about this.
Sure. Well, to put a face on this, to sort of, we're talking very abstractly.
Right.
And the only faces we have sort of are of the agents who make the arrests and the Iranian and his wife.
Right.
I wanted to tell people about why this matters, and why it matters is because this is all about, at the end of the day, protecting the troops.
Amen.
And so the book opens with the story of Seth DeVoren, who was a second lieutenant from New Jersey, and his wife Kelly, and he got married just before he shipped off to Iraq in 2003, and he too wanted to serve. He wanted to serve his country for a while, and then he wanted to perhaps become a federal agent. And he was leading a group of his platoon, the outcast platoon, in a town called Iskandariya, which is south of Baghdad, and he noticed something in the street that looked like a suspicious object, and he turned to warn the rest of his platoon, his men, and the IED was triggered by remote control, and he was killed. And this is significant because in the same area and the same region, and frankly all over Iraq and in places in Afghanistan in 2004 and 2005, other soldiers found unexploded IEDs, and inside they found remote control triggers. And when they looked at the lot and the serial numbers, they were able to trace them back to find out that they were made in the United States, in Phoenix and Minnesota, actually. And it really was a remarkable thing that sort of caught the attention of the U.S. government, and they tried to figure out, well, why is Iran buying this stuff? Why is it smuggling it? And so throughout the book, and whenever I talk about this, I like to talk about Lieutenant DeVoren, and I spoke with all members of his family, and his father became dedicated to an organization called the GI Go Fund, which is based in New Jersey but is now nationwide, that helps veterans, and which is a great charity. And the point here is that we're talking about actual people
Yes.
you might know next door, that anyone you know in the military could be affected by this.
Absolutely. And he commanded the outcast platoon, 17 men stationed at the major power facility there at the banks of the Euphrates River. And, this book does put a face on all that your research has brought forward. You have to be commended for this tremendous contribution, Operation Shakespeare. John, this is it is a very important read, and it is a wonderful read. What didn't I ask you that you'd like to have our listening audience take away from our conversation?
Thanks. Phil, I appreciate that. I think I just think that what people should understand is that Homeland Security does many different things that you think that we all know about, and that we sort of come in contact with on the news every day, with the TSA and the border and whatnot. But the fact that they have these very small units doing this all over the world, frankly, undercover, is really a remarkable thing. But it also tells us that the problem is remarkable and is really important. And if we don't get a hold of this problem, we're going to see technology come back, to bite us, and it's going to be the thing that makes some other adversary, whether it be China, Iran, Russia, it's what's going to allow them to equalize the battlefield, and we're going to lose our ability to be the dominant superpower. And that's important not because we want to start wars, we want to avoid them. And I think that it's all of our economic, political, diplomatic abilities can flow from that, and the ability for people not to start wars or not to try to provoke us, because they know that we have overwhelming superiority. And of course that goes to protecting the troops, and we just don't want to put our troops in harm's way. But if we have to, we want to make sure that we absolutely dominate the battlefield, that it's not going to be close.
Prediction. Finalist is going to turn into winner for Pulitzer Prize. John Shiffman, thank you so very much for this important piece of literature, research, and Operation Shakespeare that you shared with us. Thank you so very much, John.
Thanks, Phil. I really appreciate it.